Hi, I'd like to thank everybody for joining our Fast 5 questions to ask before an AX to D365 upgrade. We're holding these webinars because there are an incredible number of questions that have popped up as our team has engaged in these types of projects and consulted with folks that are thinking of these. So as we got more and more information and dug deeper and deeper into these types of projects, we started to notice that the information that was readily available online is mostly relegated to either marketing or very deeply technical stuff. And a lot of the critical information, the types of things that we found out as we were engaging in these projects, they're not readily found because, as I said, they're mostly hidden behind marketing hype and more detailed information, rather than the type of series of webinars and blogs and podcasts that we're featuring, which kind of dig deeper into the the business types of questions and issues that people are focusing on and facing on these projects. So my name is Peter Jekyll, and I'm helped out on these projects by Ijaz Qureshi. And between the two of us, we have 50 plus years of experience in the industry and on these types of projects. So what you're getting here is firsthand information, from the front lines. We're actually working on these projects and consulting on these types of opportunities. Our biggest take on these types of projects is that you have to reset every expectation that you have based on prior upgrade projects, your experience, etc. It is all irrelevant. This is a completely different animal. These projects have completely different, they have completely different components to them. And so, for myself, as a person that works in the industry, in more than 30 years in this space, including working with the Microsoft AX from the time that it was purchased by Microsoft, there are no upgrades that I have ever worked on that are anything like this. So what we'll jump into this very quickly is, what are the top 5 questions that I would ask myself, or things that I wish I had been able to ask as a client, anticipating or thinking about undergoing one of these projects. The one big takeaway I want to have at the start is that, if the only thing you can do is stay with us for, 2 minutes and then have to jump off, is remember the golden number, which is 150 users. There's going to be more details below, but this is the real big takeaway from what we're going to talk about. So again, if you only remember one thing today, remember the golden number of 150 users, and we'll explain more below because it's going to have a huge impact on your project. So that first question that people ask, or people should be asking, is what is the platform, right, that I'm moving to? And this is interesting because obviously the D365 is all about the cloud, but literally, your options are moving to the cloud, having an on-premise solution, or having a hybrid solution. So the thing that surprised me in the customers and the prospects we spoke to undergoing these projects is how many actually looked at on-prem as a possible option. And the other thing that surprised me was the level of detail that people were going to look at in regards to making that decision, right? Now, the first thing that you're going to find is, if you are taking a look at this AX to D365 move, is that Microsoft publishes a page where they differentiate what's available in their cloud offering or their on-premise solution. You're going to find that the differences between those are significantly large, and it's either intentional or some lag in providing these things for the on-premise solutions. But there is a big difference in what you can do with the D365 in the cloud versus on-premise. Real quick funny story: good size organization that we were taking through this analysis, and they were doing cost benefits reviews, et cetera, and just as kind of a throwaway line at some point in the evaluation, we mentioned that. Oh, and by the way, it's kind of odd that your financials can no longer be printed to Excel, exported to Excel. They have to be printed to a PDF. And the CFO in the room said, "Oh, that's not going to work for us. We're going into the cloud." So it's interesting that some of these very detailed discussions on platform, will then all of a sudden decision hinges on what some people might consider a minor point. The other thing that's very important to understand is there is what is called a hybrid solution. So if you have anything in the retail or manufacturing, data collection space, so if you have a point of sale, you're running warehousing, data capture devices, shop floor control, et cetera. If you're doing any of those types of things, the speed of the data coming off the floor or from the point of sale systems may not be fast enough for a pure cloud solution. You may have to have server components literally on premise that work with some of that data and then move data up to the cloud. So that's called a hybrid solution, and it's something that a lot of people overlook and don't understand. So that's something to question in detail on whether or not those are requirements that you have. The second biggest thing that we have found people as far as undergoing these projects is asking is, what is my path, right? And what really surprised us is that there is not one linear path for all AX customers that fits nice and neatly to the move to the D365. So this topic in and of itself could be an hours long webinar, but what I want to do is I want to alert you to the top things to think about here is, depending on the version that you have currently of AX, there may not be a straightforward upgrade from the version that you have to the cloud. So it may be a case where there are multiple upgrades that are required from one version of AX to the next version of AX to get you to a position where you could actually move into the cloud. And so that has a major, that's going to have a major impact on your decision on how to move forward on this. The other thing is what if we have so many customizations, right? And so much work done in our current version of AX because it's much older, that a lot of those capabilities are now found, off the shelf, to some extent in the latest and greatest version of AX or D365, that the plan is, why don't we just do a reimplementation, because that upgrade path of trying to move forward the modifications that you've made to your system are so complex and they're replaced, so that instead of doing an actual upgrade, it makes much more logical sense to do a reimplementation. And at that point, you get that entire discussion of what your data looks like, and the complexity of that data, especially if it has lots of customized fields, and how do we move that data and clean it up to move it into a later version of either the AX or the D365. One of the interesting stories that popped up for us is that we had a customer that was going to have to do a reimplementation because of the complexities of their modifications, but they could not tell their management team that it was a reimplementation. They had to sell them on a upgrade job. Well, technically behind the scenes, it was literally a complete reimplementation of the software. Now, one of the interesting, really fascinating things that we have found, because of the cost and these multiple paths that are available to people and the complexity of these projects, is this is a special path that I call the stabilization path. And what does that mean? We had a very, very good-sized enterprise, international type client. This was the first time I ran into this scenario, that literally has the money because of their size and their numbers of locations and the fact that they're international, that has the capabilities, to fund one of these upgrade projects. But they went out and literally interviewed 12 different partners. that do these kinds of projects, and they got wildly, different cost estimates on what this is going to cost, on what that upgrade from their current version of AX to that D360 cloud solution was going to cost. And when they got done with interviewing everybody, they came to the realization that their best move to D365 was to currently upgrade to the latest and greatest version of AX, which is R3, which is a very stable, very powerful platform. And the actual, functional differences of the capabilities that you have in R3 versus what you currently have in the D365 in the cloud are minimal, right? And so the decision was, because of the nature of these upgrades today, the amount of money that it costs, the fact that all these upgrade processes and projects are not yet fully baked, what we're going to do is we're going to stabilize on the latest and greatest version of R3. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to unwind all of the potentially customizations that we don't need with the latest version. We're going to clean up our software. We're going to get rid of unnecessary modifications. We're going to try to take advantage of all of that functionality that we haven't used previously. But what we're going to do is we're going to do it on R3. And then what we're going to do is when we've stabilized on that platform, enough time will have passed that hopefully the upgrade processes are less expensive, more automated, and there are more skill sets available in the marketplace to do those effectively. So we were very surprised at the number of folks that are now starting to consider that as the optimal methodology for moving into the D365, just not today, but in the future with a plan that says, let's clean things up and let's let the tools catch up, and let's let the cost drop down. The other thing that if you think about that movement to the R3 instead of the D365, we started talking to folks where the primary reason for moving to the D365 because they wanted to be in the cloud, and because of the benefits that for IT, for perhaps you have internal infrastructure that is aging, hardware that needs to be replaced, et cetera, et cetera. So the primary reason wasn't that, oh geez, we need to be on this latest and greatest version of AX. We're pretty happy with what what it's doing, but it sure would be great from a cost standpoint and an IT management control, IT a cost standpoint to move into the cloud. And so they took a look at that. So one of the things that we're finding is that there are great hosting partners, right, or that will take an R3 version of, they'll take an R3 version or take your current version and move it up to R3. And now what you can do is you can still take advantage of the cloud, right? Take that deep breath, as we talked about, stabilize on this R3 platform, and then down the road, move from that cloud-based solution of R3 into the D365. So again, there's still many more nuances of this, but the thing that really surprised us was there really is not one path for everyone, and a lot of these different paths have gaping holes in terms of the types of help that you can get to take you down it, and that's one of the things we can talk about in more detail. That next big question for everyone is, what is the cost, right? And in our actual real life project experience, what we are finding is that we are seeing projects where the cost to upgrade is as much or a multiple of an original implementation. Now, let's say that again, as much or more as an initial implementation. So for that company that spent $1 million to implement AX, taking a look at a project of $1 million or $2 million or $5 million to do an upgrade is insane. So what we're seeing, however, is that when people go out into the marketplace to quote these projects, right, what they're getting is they're getting quotes that vary all across the board. Now, the critical thing is that the vast majority of effort regarding these projects has to do with It has to do with the number of objects that you have in your AX code. So what's an object? So objects are for a non-development person, objects are pieces of program code, and they're split up into forms. A form is an input form, for example, reports, customizations, custom integrations with legacy systems. Those are big ones. Real customized functionality that you have as a specialized business. And so what you can do is you can see how many of these different types that you have. Now, the problem in quoting your project based on the numbers of these objects is that the number of objects is not the critical factor. The critical factor is the level of sophistication or complexity of each one of those individual objects. So what happens is we see that a lot of people, the analysis is, well, here's the number of objects and here's type of the cost to upgrade these types of objects. And what that can do in reality is it can lead to wild swings of actual quotes versus the level of effort that it's actually required. So the other thing that we're finding is that because AX, the D365 product is so successful, that the vast number of the bigger partners in the channel, what they do is they focus on those new deals and implementing those new deals, and the upgrade projects are more of an afterthought. And so being an afterthought, the level of skill and experience with those teams isn't there. And so what we're seeing on the quoting side is that one of two things: the lowball bid to get the foot in the door, based on not an exact knowledge of everything that it takes to do one of these upgrades, or an understanding that these are very complex and time consuming. So let's throw out the $1 million quote, right? And if the person isn't scared away, then we have got enough wiggle room to figure this out as we go along. So the key is, can you analyze the objects accurately inside of your AX implementation to get an accurate estimate of the cost? And my rule of thumb for these upgrade projects is that the guarantee for no scope creep is that don't do the project, because like an implementation, there are so many unknowns currently on these projects that things will pop up that scope creep is going to be inevitable. Lastly, and most importantly, is how is Microsoft, how is Microsoft involved in these upgrades? What can I expect from them? What are my expectations regarding, Microsoft and this process? So, a couple of things here. The move of AX to D365 puts you into the world that the AX company is unfamiliar with, because the cloud completely changes access to data environments, right? The ease of modifications and access to things. And so, with AX, the whole selling point was that your team and your partners had ready access, to the code and to the environments, and they could do things at their speed, right? All of that changes dramatically, and things are much more tightened down, much more complex, much more difficult to access. And so that whole, from that standpoint, that move to D365 is going to be a shock. Now, the other thing that people completely 100% underestimate when they go into these projects is that, especially if you have, some type of a go live date, where you have to be able to have a very tight project plan and be able to execute to that project plan, there are multiple steps in this upgrade project that are controlled by Microsoft. And Microsoft will publish, this is how long it takes to do X, Y, and Z. in reality, we have rarely found that any of those things that Microsoft has to do are done anywhere near in the time frames that they publish. And so if you're going into this without the experience of having done this before, you might see that you have huge time commitments that you weren't able to put in the project plan because you stuck in some time that Microsoft quoted, regarding steps of the project. So it's a huge piece. The other thing that really shocked us was that, when you sign up to do one of these projects, what you do is you get, your project gets into Lifecycle Services, which is an interface where it's kind of that admin portal for managing your D365 and your upgrade process. The thing that we didn't realize when we first started these projects is that everything that you need to do, regarding the D365 and how it impacts and is impacted by Azure, right? It's not all that. There's an incredible amount of expertise required of Azure that's not contained inside, the LCS experience, and you have to go out and find the Azure experience to get a lot of critical things done. And shockingly, we would go and get Azure experts, and they would look at us and say, yeah, what's D365, right? So that knowledge base of people that are sophisticated with Azure, but understand how it works with D365, there's a huge gap there, right? And so if you don't have that expertise, that Azure expertise, there's going to be parts of this project that are going to be incredibly challenging and costly. See, the thing I think about is in working in the LCS, it's very simple. It's very similar in folks' minds of that, Office D365 admin, where everything, having to do with your email, for example, is in that real simple, admin function. And the LCS is positioned to be very similar, but in reality, it is much more complex. It's much more complicated. It's evolving, and it is very complex to work with the first time you work with it. And you have to have an incredible amount of expertise outside of it to deal with Azure. So unless you understand all of those things, you're going to be surprised, probably unpleasantly, in several areas of the project. Now, we talked about the 150 users. That is the key line of demarcation for Microsoft, whether or not your upgrade project is going to have a Microsoft upgrade engineer dedicated to your project, or below 150 users, what you get to do is you get to look up information in their various online libraries. And that is literally the difference. Above 150 users, you get an engineer dedicated to your project, because there are going to be tons of times when you're going to need that engineering expertise. 150 and below, tons of customers, right? You get to look up, data in online, archives of data. The difference between those two is like night and day, right? So a recent customer that under that 150 users, that required a lot of Microsoft expertise, but wasn't above that 150 users, their only option was to buy a support contract that literally cost them $80,000 a year, so that they could enter priority support requests having to do with Azure around their D365 implementation. So that to me is the biggest number, that 150 users. Above it, you're going to get that Microsoft assistance. Below it, you're going to need incredibly higher level of expertise and potential, learn on your dime from people that are doing this the first time with you. So that to me is, that critical number for you to investigate and take a look at. If you want to discuss your specific project, whether you need a proposal for an upgrade project, an ongoing project, or you're just looking for a cost sanity check on some quotes that you've got, drop us a line, give us a call. I would love to work with you. Thank you very much for spending the time, and I look forward to hearing from everybody.